Good afternoon.
Oh, it's just so rock and roll. It's that traditional last slot of NDC where they let us have the big shiny room because none of the grown-ups want
speakers
it.
have gone home.
And
I've had 2 hours sleep,
and I am
have
actually here on time, so that's something.
So I've had 2 hours sleep, and I have a stinking hangover. Mark is withdrawing from antidepressants.
Seriously.
And they are about to elect Donald Trump, or about to, what are they doing?
Inaugurating him.
Donald Trump as president of the free world. So we are your entertainment for the afternoon. And we are going to present something for you today. Software engineering, the greatest hits, 1947 to 2047.
Because we all know it goes in cycles, and in 1947 they were saying do this, and then in 1957 they were saying do the other thing, and then in 1967 it had gone back to 1947, and in 2027 we'll all be dead. So, but you know, we thought we'd take a look at how these things have been cycling over the last 70 years. Maths, not my strong point.
So we're going to start.
And our predictions for the slightly less optimistic predictions for the next 30 years.
So we're going to start in 1936. In 1936, I told you maths wasn't his strong point. 1936, there were computers, but they did one thing. They were machines that were built to perform one calculation, and most of them performed artillery calculations, because the most important problem anyone could think of to solve was how to make the bomb land on the other place.
We were really terrible at that before 1936.
And in 1936, Alan Turing had a brainwave. He was at home wrapping gifts before Christmas, and he couldn't find the end of the sellotape. And he had a vision of an endless tape that could function as a universal computing machine. So, shortly after this, there was a bit of an upset. Some people in Germany voted to take back control after years of economic recession and unrest.
They were going to make Germany great again.
The problem is that they wanted to take back control of Poland, which had not really been theirs in the first place, and this meant things got a little bit messy for a while. Now, one of the key elements in all this mess is that the teams involved couldn't read each other's messages. The Germans were using something called an Enigma machine, which was a very early hardware precursor to emoji, as in if you didn't have the right device to receive it on, it came through as unintelligible gibberish. So, Turing and some of his compadres were summoned to Bletchley Park. Now, some people say Bletchley Park was the seat of Allied intelligence in World War II because of its proximity to London and relative obscurity. I think they put them there because they were hoping the Luftwaffe would help them remodel, because it is a hideously ugly building. So Turing arrived, and they said, we need your help to break all of these messages. And he said, righto, I'm going to need an infinite length of paper tape. And he rang the quartermaster and said, I need an infinite length of tape to make a machine for breaking coded messages. And the quartermaster rang him back a day later, and he said, we got your tape, Mr. Turing, but we can't find a box big enough to put it in. Can you come up with something else? So he did. He invented Colossus, the first digital programmable computer, which was used to break Enigma. Now, around this time...
Just in case there are any Americans in the room, yes, it fucking was. All right? Just let it go.
It was around about this time that the German forces invented something we call the security anti-pattern, because they had certain protocols that they followed rigorously, such as all field stations would send out a weather report every morning at 9 o'clock sharp. So every morning at 9 o'clock, somebody in Tobruk, which is on the border between Egypt and Libya, would get on the radio and they'd say, hello, Berlin, it's hot and sunny. Tobruk out. Which meant by 5 minutes past 9, Bletchley Park would have a known plaintext they could use to break the day's keys. The war ended. Winston Churchill ordered that Colossus be broken up into pieces no bigger than a man's hand, which just goes to show if they'd done it using iPhones, we'd still have all of these working relics. And shortly after that, in 1947, we invented the Software Conference.
NDC London, 1947. Please do not lean on the unexploded bombs.
So, the great innovations of 1947, the best practice of the industry.
Well, marvelous news. The Americans have turned the computer back on again. They've been turning it off and on again to fix a problem. They turned it off last year in 1946, and they've just turned it back on again. And it's all working, and it now has 300 bits more memory.
They introduced a revolutionary new software development methodology called Don't Upset Alan Turing. This was a very important way of getting your projects through to production.
And just so for all the gentlemen in the room, please do remember that programming is women's work, and you should let them get on with it, and you should focus on the important business of smoking pipes and arguing about cricket. It's very dodgy doing that sort of joke. But no, in 1947, all of the programmers who worked on ENIAC over in the States, ENIAC, by the way, that was the computer that existed in the world at the time because we'd smashed Colossus, and ENIAC stood for Electronic Numerical Integrator and Computer. And then somebody worked out that if they left out the electronic numerical integrator, the whole thing would be much smaller, and so the computer was born. I loved that joke. Just me, apparently. But yes, everybody who worked on programming the ENIAC, they were all women. There was a team of like 8, and the idea that men would do programming was just ridiculous. We had far better things to be doing with our time, largely involving hitting the actual computer itself with hammers.
Percussive maintenance, they call it.
Percussive maintenance.
Time-honored technique. Best practice, I think they call it.
Best practice.
So up until this point, there'd been some controversy over the best way to write a computer program. Some people said that you should program the cogs and gears and put them on by hand. Other people said that you should wind instructions onto memory cores. When they invented the idea of putting punched cards in, this was the last programming language anybody was ever going to need. They had solved the problem, and we could all get on with innovating.
Although there were some people who thought that the punched cards just tried a little bit too hard to do everything for you, and that you weren't a real programmer if you had to rely on a punched card to make sure that you'd done your work correctly.
Did you know punched card programming is the origin of the word patch?
Is it?
It is. There were certain programs where you could correct an error by putting a little patch of tape over the holes. Because you could always make more holes by punching more of them with a hole punch. But if you needed to remove a hole, you'd do it by putting a little bit of tape over it, and that was how you'd patch a program. And from that, we get the idea of patching files, and we get the patch verb in HTTP. So now you know.
Now I know.
So
one more top tip, though, for 1947. Do try not to drink the mercury. It's very pretty, but it will not do you any good, and we do need it for the computer memory. Because they used to store stuff in computer memory by setting up a vibration going backwards and forwards down tubes of mercury. That was how computer memory worked back in the day before they even had valves.
So
yes.
The 1950s. Very early on in the 1950s, 1951, the aforementioned Dr. Alan Turing publishes a paper in which he postulates something he calls the Turing test. This is, you have a human operator sat in front of 2 terminals. One of them is connected to a machine, the other one is connected to another human being. Turing's estimate on this was if after 5 minutes of conversation, the human operator couldn't tell with 70% certainty, the machine on the other end could be said to be intelligent. Now, the Turing test has been a gold standard, a hallmark of artificial intelligence ever since. It was actually passed in 2015 when they found a man in Birmingham who was dumber than his own Sky Plus box. The artificial intelligence community somehow did not hail this as the victory that we all thought it might be.
So yes, the problem with AI is that people ask it the wrong questions. In 1952, an electronic computer predicted accurately the outcome of the United States presidential election. And everyone thought, that's a ridiculous result, that's never going to happen, that guy's never going to win, people are not that stupid. And then it turned out the computer had got it completely right. And last
1%.
year... Sorry?
Within 1%.
Within 1%.
It was Eisenhower running for president, and he was behind in the polls, and he won a landslide, and a UNIVAC computer at the University of Pennsylvania predicted it, and CBS News, whose idea it was to get the computer to predict the election, said, don't be ridiculous, and it was accurate to within 1%.
Yes. And last year, of course, a computer program predicted the outcome of the presidential election, except it wasn't an artificial intelligence, it was Leisure Suit Larry.
Yes. So, in 1956, The Forbidden Planet movie came out, MGM cult science fiction hit, featuring Robbie the Robot. The first time Asimov's laws of robotics had been seen in a mainstream production. Robbie the Robot was clunky, he was over-engineered, he was slow, he was inefficient, he was inexplicably popular. He was based on an alien design supposedly found in a crashed spacecraft. We've recently found a deleted scene from that movie in which the archaeologists recovered the blueprints for Robbie, and it says Microsoft SharePoint on the front of the folder, which explains a lot. So, 1957.
Welcome to NDC London, 1957. I hope you all enjoy the conference. And as you all know, it's another year, another trendy programming language. This time it's called Fortran from IBM.
Now, Mr. Rendle, I hear Fortran is the last programming language we're ever going to need.
Absolutely. Fortran does everything you could possibly want from a programming language. We will never need another programming language in the whole of the future, and the same is also true of Lisp. So Fortran is the only programming language you will ever need, and so is Lisp.
It is worth mentioning that Lisp is the only programming language that Paul Graham has ever used. Except he felt the need to rewrite Lisp in ARC, which, as far as I can work out, is a language that was created entirely so he could write Hacker News, which I think is the only production system built in ARC, the language he said was going to change the world. If only they'd had a language that you could use to build interactive websites, he could have saved himself a great deal of trouble.
Personally, I don't think anything's ever going to beat vanilla assembly language.
So, best practice and productivity tips from NDC London, 1957. Mr. Rendle, what was the best kind of pencil to write your code?
A 2B pencil makes a firm mark on the paper, although, Peter, if you could try to make your ones look like ones and not sevens, that would help the programmers out an awful lot. Not you, Peter. Peter. You are other Peter.
The 1960s.
Why am I talking like this?
Because it's 1957, dear.
Oh, yes, I remember.
Computers aren't just for anybody, it's a precision instrument. The 1960s, London is swinging, and across the pond, they've decided everything's getting a little bit chaotic, and they should standardize some of this. Something must be done. We are going to develop a standard code for information interchange. Now, this is a bizarre, archaic code lost in the mists of time called ASCII, which has mechanical codes to control the behavior of your mechanical teletype machine. They had a code that, when sent, would cause the paper platen to feed by one line. They had a control that would cause the carriage to return to the start of the next line. Fortunately, these have all been abandoned. I mean, imagine how daft it would be in this day and age if people still had embedded codes in their source control systems to make their teletypewriters move.
But if it wasn't for ASCII, how would we display the logos on the Linux versions of popular Windows database systems?
Now, the other interesting thing that happened in the 1960s is that memory was very, very expensive. Not like $50 for an 8-gig upgrade expensive. Memory cost $1 per bit.
$8 per byte.
And programmers, being very, very clever people, started coming up with ways of saving money by using less memory. Now, one of these was they dug into the aforementioned set of ASCII codes, and they found something called tab, which would make your mechanical teletype machine advance to a little metal flap called a tab stop that you would fold down over your manuscript so you could make columns. And someone went, we could save quite a lot of storage by using one of these tab characters instead of 4 spaces in our code. Now,
8 spaces.
Fortunately,
8 spaces.
Fortunately, by the early 1980s, teletype machines were obsolete and memory was cheap, and so the tabs fell out of favor, and no one uses tab control characters to indent source code anymore. But
well,
that's
idiots.
Just the start of it. Because one day, some bright spark is looking at reams and reams of data in one of his programs, and he says, boss, we're storing 19 in this quite a lot.
There's a lot of 19s in the data.
I've got a good idea.
Let's not store the 19s. Because obviously 19, it's always going to be 19. Why would we ever need to know that it's 19? That's just stupid. Every one of those 19s is costing us $16 to store. So my brilliant idea is to elide the 19s. We'll just use 2 digits to store the year. What could possibly go wrong?
There is a lovely quote from Douglas Adams talking about this, where he's talking about the computer industry and its ability to predict things. And he says there's 2 things in particular that it failed to foresee. One was the coming of the internet. The other was the fact that the century would end. I can imagine the meeting where they're like, when is this 19-digit date thing going to become a problem? They're like, oh, we don't know, boss. Some point in the future, we're really not sure.
To be fair, this was the 1960s, and where now in offices they have the health and safety executive directive that tells you what to do if you cut your finger on a particularly sharp piece of memory or something. They used to have the instructions of what to do when the nuclear war started.
Duck and cover, right?
Duck and cover, yeah. You basically get under your desk like that. Or if you were really lucky, you could put a mattress against the wall, which would totally and completely protect you from the
Funny what you were saying
ensuing
about things going
Holocaust.
in cycles, isn't it?
It is, yes.
So, the 1960s, we capture a decade of best practice. NDC London, 1967. But not a lot of attention was paid to this because something much more exciting was going on the other side of the planet. They were trying to land on the moon. Now, anybody who is an aficionado of the software and the control systems in the space program will know that as Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin are descending to the lunar surface in the Eagle landing module, they had a computer problem. Bonus point for anyone who can tell me what it was. It was a 1202.
Oh, yes.
If you listen to the transcript, you will hear Buzz Aldrin saying to Mission Control, 1202 alarm, Houston. And they say, Roger, and they ignore it, and it turns out to be fine, because it's just the radar going a bit fast. This is testament, we've got these people on the moon, and the most helpful the computer can be in terms of keeping them appraised of their life and death situation with the eyes of the world watching them is a 4-digit number. Nowadays, of course, we've come a lot further. If they were to attempt the same thing and have the same problem, what would happen is a screen would come up that said, sorry, Windows has encountered a problem trying to descend to the lunar surface. Would you like to check Windows Update for solutions? Error code 1202.
I want to know what the other 1,201 possible things that could go wrong were.
It's on GitHub.
It is on GitHub. I will have to go and look
GitHub.
through. Yes, but it's just the numbers, isn't it?
And someone's opened a pull request for stirring the oxygen tanks on Apollo 13, which I thought was rather clever.
Was it Rob Ashton?
So they land on the moon. Margaret Hamilton leads the MIT team who build this amazing navigation software, which is actually, it wasn't even programmed. They actually wound the instructions onto little cores of memory.
The last programming language you're ever going to need.
The last language you'll ever need. And then, tick, 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 the end of 1969, the clock ticks over, and we are in the 1970s.
False.
It is false.
It is.
Does anyone know why it's false? So, because of massive advances going on during the 1970s, a lot of people got together and they decided it would be a good idea if computers had something called an epoch. They said, we're going to pick a point in time, and we're going to call that 0, and we are going to count seconds forwards and back, or milliseconds, forwards and backwards from there, so that we know what time and date it is. You have to remember, these are computers that are too dumb to know what century they're in, but they're counting seconds from the stroke of midnight 1970. So if you're using one of those modern type-safe, highly productive languages like JavaScript, where everything can be truthy or falsy, all dates in JavaScript are true, all times in JavaScript are true, except for the stroke of midnight on the 1st of January 1970.
Which is 0.
And I was doing a
false
talk about JavaScript once, and there was this kind of old San Francisco hippie geezer in the audience, and I told this story, and he said, you know what, man? I was there. It was midnight, New Year's Eve, the end of the summer of love. We'd walked on the moon. Everything was so positive, and then it all turned to shit. It was false. Which I rather enjoyed. So,
NDC London, 1977.
Tell us, Mark, what is the last programming language we're ever going to need?
It's BASIC.
It is
It
BASIC.
is specifically Apple BASIC,
Because
which you get for free, pre-installed on a computer
that you have to
can
solder together
actually
yourself.
fit in the back of your car and take to your house.
So this was a revolution. Suddenly you had a computer you had to take home. We had BASIC, a powerful, completely new language based on the clear and unambiguous syntax of English, that famous language that doesn't lend itself at all to ambiguity and double entendres. So,
yes, and we are actually predicting at this point that someday there may be a computer in every school in the world, except in England, obviously, where they don't fund the education system properly.
So, The 1980s. What happened in the 1980s?
Well,
What was the last programming language we're ever going to need?
The last programming language you're ever going to want to look at in 1987 is, of course, Perl. Thank you, Larry Wall. Thank you for Perl.
Perl has the singular accomplishment of being the only programming language in history which rendered all languages obsolete, including itself. Because having written Perl and then gone back and tried to read it, you would not only stop wanting to write Perl, you'd stop wanting to write software, or read software, or go outside, or do anything except sit rocking quietly for hours on end. Anyone still got any Perl running in production?
I have some sed and awk running in
Wow.
production.
I got an email the other day from someone. They found a 14-year-old web page that I had written about using Perl on Windows NT. And they emailed me and said, "You're going to laugh at this, but we are having that problem in production right now."
One of my tech notes I wrote for Baldwin at the time is still on their website.
Yeah.
Somewhere.
Once you put it on the internet, it never goes away. And people find it. And they're like, "Do you still know anything about this?" I'm like, "No, I haven't used Windows NT in 15 years. Sorry, good luck."
My favorite thing about Perl is that there is a proper, like, PhD-style mathematical proof, like from set theory or category theory or whatever.
Yes,
a mathematical proof that Perl cannot be parsed.
Yes.
It is impossible to parse Perl. The only way to work out what a Perl program is supposed to do is to run it and just watch to find out, because the internal state is so utterly baroque that you cannot just tell from looking at it what it's going to do. It has to be run. And this is mathematical proof. This is like Fermat's last theorem type proof.
Perl is lovely.
It's great.
Perl is the only language where any sufficiently advanced string of punctuation is indistinguishable from a program. So, 1987 to 1997, we get into an astonishing decade because the internet happens, the web happens. Suddenly, all sorts of people who'd never touched computers before are getting them in their houses because they want to use them to shop for things and buy things and download things and browse things. And this whole amazing wealth of best practice emerges fully formed. Microsoft give us the Blink tag, which you can use to make eye-catching content on your web pages that stands out.
And the marquee tag.
The marquee tag was that IE?
That was
Netscape was Blink.
Netscape gave us Blink, and
IE gave us
Microsoft
Marquee.
gave us Marquee.
Do you know why
And then the next
Microsoft-
versions of both their browsers actually added the support for the other guys' tags. And the best thing about the really, really good thing, the boon to web developers everywhere in the 1990s, was that the Blink and Marquee tags were properly transitive, which meant if you put a Marquee tag inside a Blink tag or a Blink tag inside a Marquee tag, the effect was the same. And the effect was that I would come back in time using a machine I invented in 2007 and kill you.
I have never done this.
What, invented a time machine and gone back and killed people for creating GeoCities web pages?
Well, if I'd done that, how would I know? I've never put a Blink inside a marquee or a marquee. So,
I leave myself notes on
does
the
anyone
fridge.
know why the marquee tag and all these little bells and whistles? And do you remember when Internet Explorer would let you make the scroll bar a different color? They were basically casting around for anything to make IE look better than Netscape. And they didn't have a whole lot to go on, because they'd been beaten to the punch by Netscape in almost every conceivable way. And I had this sort of metaphorical vision of someone at Microsoft walking into the workshop and going, "Hey, what do we got in here that we can use? That's no good, that's no good, that's no good." Ah, the PowerPoint rendering engine. That'll do. Because that's what Internet Explorer 3 and 4 and 5 were built on. They used the visual effects from the rendering engine that ran inside PowerPoint 97, which explains a lot. It really does.
Then, of course, they managed to get rid of Netscape anyway by getting the Microsoft employee Jamie Z to go undercover at Netscape and say, "Let's rewrite it from scratch."
They didn't do that. AOL did that.
Well, yes.
This is AOL, the company who gave out CD-ROMs in the petrol station that you could use to get on the internet. You remember when you used to get
Or
on the
to
internet
decorate
using
your
a
house.
CD-ROM from a petrol station? And AOL got, and I've never quite worked the arithmetic on this, AOL got so rich giving out free CDs that they bought Time Warner Communications Group,
Yes.
who owned Time Magazine and the New York Times and Warner Brothers and these massive things. AOL, free CD people, bought Time Warner Communications. And then they said, "We bought Netscape." And then they're like, "Oh, we need to rewrite it all from scratch. We need all new code." Whoever ran Netscape 5? or 6 or 7. Who remembers when Netscape 4.8 came out, because they were like, we need to ship something. We are getting kicked so hard here. So yes, the web happened. We had 216 web-safe colors that we recommended you used on all your pages so that they would render properly on everything. We had the last programming language you'll ever need in 1997.
Java.
Solved all the problems.
It did.
Every language that came before it.
You could write once and crash everywhere.
It was remarkable. They had Java applets. So the big thing, 1997, you were all going to write, we're going to get rid of desktop computers completely. We were going to implement everything as Java applets that you could run on your net-top box. Entire companies were going to be using productivity software on televisions running on a glorified Sky Plus box that was connected to dial-up internet powered by free CDs from the petrol station. It was a glorious, brilliant vision of the future, and everyone actually believed that was what was going to happen.
Also, the first programming joke I remember is knock knock.
Who's there?
Java. For those of you in the room who only recently got hair in surprising places, it used to take a really long time to... Actually, it still does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, the Java VM used to take a very, very long time to start up on a Pentium.
There are profound moments I have sometimes where you've got a piece of software somewhere that works and does a good job really, really well, and one day you have to go and configure it. So we use TeamCity, JetBrains continuous integration server, which is brilliant, and I absolutely love it. And one day it's like, this is running a bit slowly. I wonder if we can crank up the amount of memory that's allocated to it. And I dig in. And not only is it Java, you know, this is a good piece of software that actually works quite well, but it's 32-bit Java unless you swap out the JVM and put it on 64-bit. And we did that, and now it absolutely flies. But there's always that little moment of shock where you're like, but this is good, and Java was terrible.
Yeah.
Consistently dreadful. Enterprise Java beans, do you remember them?
I saw one last
They were
week
the
in the
last
wild.
component model where you saw one
I
last
saw
week.
it in the wild. Yes, it was. I was walking through some long grass, and oh no, hang on, that was a Pokemon. Yeah, sorry.
Got to catch them all. So, 1997, of course, the other thing that starts happening around this time is the advent of social networking. This amazing technology that has been built which allows people to connect with each other all over the world. Facebook is up and coming, but that's nothing compared to the excitement that is...
LiveJournal. GeoCities.
I've lost a decade. I was about to
Angels
say Windows Presentation Foundation.
Well, yes,
I think that was...
we have lost a decade there.
We have lost a decade.
I think I was still kind of, VB. I was doing MFC to create my Windows desktop applications, Microsoft Foundation classes, which is basically C++ and then 31 megabytes of source code on top of that to give you dialogues. We didn't have a UI designer. We had to drag the things around and put all that stuff all over the place. And then Microsoft invented COM and ActiveX and everything, and I tried to write a COM component in C++, and that is the only reason I have ever used Visual Basic for anything.
Okay, we're going to do an experiment now. I'm going to say a word, and I'm going to see what noise Mark makes. I unknown. This is an interface that says, I don't know. It pokes stuff, maybe. There's some... It's basically, it's actually an implementation of the whole principle of discoverable APIs.
My favorite thing about I unknown
horribly bad and wrong
is that because there's some problem with changing interfaces once you've defined them in the next version of whatever it is. You can't change. You can change an abstract base class, but you can't change an interface because shit will break. So there is an I unknown 2, which has. And I mean, anyone who's ever dug around in like the Visual Studio SDK or the Office SDK, there are all these interfaces, and there's whatever it is, document environment 2, document environment 3.5, document environment 4.
ICANN has cheeseburger.
Exactly.
Yeah. So let's skip a decade. 2007.
2007. So the thing I really don't understand in 2007 is why the hell is this school-like social network thing? Why is everyone getting so excited about that? Obviously, at this point, MySpace has reached the point of undisplaceability. No one ever needs anything other than I mean,
were you friends with Tom?
The Facebook thing, you can't even customize your home page. It's that default blue, and that's all it ever is.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, MySpace, the last social network you're ever going to need.
Well, this was the era of things becoming popular when you couldn't do the most rudimentary things with them. We had phones where you couldn't copy and paste. And the fact that we'd had phones that you couldn't copy and paste on for decades before that didn't really cross anyone's mind. They're like, no, there's phones out there, it can't copy and paste, it's rubbish.
It was suddenly kind of, well, hang on. Now, the fact that I can't copy and paste on my phone just seems completely wrong.
It's like, did you ever see
Google would make an operating system for phones? I bet they'd enable copy and paste.
The Louis C.K. thing? He says, I'm getting on a flight and there's a guy next to me and they're doing like a private trial of in-flight Wi-Fi. Hasn't been advertised, hasn't charged for it, no one's been paid for it. They sort of announce, we have a limited trial going on this flight of in-flight Wi-Fi. You know, the guy next to him gets his laptop out. After 20 minutes, the Wi-Fi cuts out and the guy goes, this is bullshit. And he's like, how do you get so entitled so quickly? How do you go from, I didn't even know this thing existed, to I'm going to be really angry now that this free thing that we tried out is taken away? Yes, the age of entitlement. This is the dawning of it.
I remember last year when they finally let journalists, well, one of the things they did was they told journalists, hey, guess where we've been building HoloLens? Down there. Yeah, under the briefing room where you come all the time. Didn't look there, did you, Mary Jo? But they finally let the journalists from Ars Technica and The Verge and Polygon and all these guys, they went, come on, come and try HoloLens, come and try It actually makes three-dimensional things appear in the room with you. And every single one of the journalists went, oh, well, it cuts off at the sides, it's rubbish. It's the same thing.
Really appreciated something until you found a reason to dislike it.
Exactly.
Speaking of disliking things, Windows Presentation Foundation, wasn't that a good idea?
Oh, yes.
That was groundbreaking technology at NDC London 2007. Entire workshops on how you could build user interfaces by writing, it looked a little bit like HTML with a sort of drag-and-drop designer.
XAML. The last markup language you will ever need.
So what was the last programming language we're ever going to use in 2007?
Scratch? I think it's the last programming language our children are ever going to need.
It's probably the whole new definition of spawning child processes, that's for sure. I didn't do any programming in 2007 because it was the year Portal came out.
Yes.
And it did unusual things to my brain, and now I can think sideways.
Technically, some of the stuff you did in Portal was programming. It was kind of, if I'm going to turn that one on and I'm going to turn that one on, then I'm going to do that. And so you're kind of flipping gates is what you're doing. And you are creating an algorithm to get from that part of the level to that part of the level, preferably avoiding this part of the level here.
My favorite thing in Portal was the thing you did where you put portals on the roof and the floor and get something falling really, really, really fast, and then you get the timing just right and you fire it onto the wall and it comes flying out across the room. I probably wasted hours just doing that for the joy of doing it. I wasn't even solving puzzles.
See,
anyway,
if I had the Portal thing, then I would put one portal just by the side of my chair, and I would open the fridge door and put the other one on the inside of the fridge door. And I could just go, yay, beer.
So apparently there was an NDC in 2017.
It was shit.
I don't know, everyone was going on about the Dockers and containerization.
Yeah.
It's like, so the thing I've always wanted to know, we have all these wares. We have software and hardware and firmware and
wetware.
Middleware. I'm guessing, middleware is the stuff between your underwear and your outerwear. Is that right?
Yep.
And the stuff you use to manage your containers, is this Tupperware or have I missed something?
You haven't missed something. Everybody else missed that. I am going to get onto the people at Docker.
You heard it here first. By the end of 2017, anyone who's got container management solutions, it will be enterprise Tupperware. This is the new thing, and we're going to make it happen.
Yes. YAML is the last programming language you're ever going to need.
So, what is the last programming language we're ever going to need?
It's YAML for Docker Compose.
Oh, of course.
Because you don't need to write code anymore.
Except there's a web page that'll turn it into JSON for you.
Almost certainly. Isn't YAML a subset of JSON?
I know. I've been doing CloudFormation all week. Some of my synapses have died.
Yes.
So that's a nice language.
CloudFormation.
What, you want an HTTP method on this endpoint? Write an entire stack definition for it, all the way down. We're not just going to let you put wildcards. No, there are no wildcards in CloudFormation. You will define every single detail of everything. So what happened at NDC Edinburgh 2027?
So the big question at NDC Edinburgh 2027, is .NET Core ready yet? So
we are actually, ready, really,
we are making, well, define ready, but no. So yes, welcome to the first NDC in the newly independent Republic of Scotland. Yeah, the big question, is .NET Core ready yet? After 8 years of not being able to work on .NET Core because President Trumputin said they had to focus on cyber, Microsoft have finally shipped .NET Core 2.0. But
this would be cyber in the definition of CSI cyber.
Yes.
Yes.
Trump cyber, yes.
Yes.
So they finally shipped 2.0, but with the caveat that they are deprecating the CS Proj format and MS Build in favor of makefiles.
Now,
again,
one of my
paging Rob Ashton.
one of my favorite innovations from the last decade that was presented here. First of all, we had VR. We started with the Gear VR and Google Cardboard, and consumer-grade VR got you remember when it got really good? Like it was immersive. Even journalists weren't complaining about it cutting off the sides anymore. And then self-driving cars became a thing. And then someone worked out that if you had a VR headset on while you were in your self-driving car, you could play driving games while you were driving. And the whole thing came full circle. I just think that's absolutely beautiful. And now that they're using that along with geolocation, you can actually simulate driving the drive that you're actually driving while you're not driving it because you're using technology to drive it for you. Possibilities are endless.
Somewhere in the world, a man is saying, do you, Donald J. Trump?
So, Mr. Trump, I can give you one marshmallow now. If you wait 5 minutes, I'll give you 2 marshmallows and swear you in as President of the United States. That would solve all these problems. It's a classic experiment, a psychological experiment you do on kids, where you see whether they have yet sort of developed the concept of delayed gratification, because it's a learning model. Very, very young kids have no concept of what it means to wait 5 minutes and then get more.
If you say you can have this one Haribo now, or you can wait 5 minutes and I will give you this bag of Haribo, they will take the one Haribo.
Yeah.
Then in 5 minutes they'll cry.
Yes. So it's a funny satirical joke about the fact that the President of the United States, as of 25 seconds ago, is a massive overgrown child.
Anyway, back in 2027... Yes.
It's called Microsoft Dynamics Xamarin Cloud 365 Enterprise Edition now, because they ran out of numbers and had to start tacking more adjectives onto it.
But it works really well in Tupperware containers. We will be having a memorial service at NDC Edinburgh 2027 for Troy Hunt, who obviously last year uploaded himself into the internet and promptly got taken down by a botnet.
Putting a whole new spin on "Have I Been Pwned?" Sorry, Troy. You have, mate.
But we will also be having a roundtable discussion. The .NET Rocks guys will be hosting a panel on the ethics of outsourcing your development work to cheap code sweatshops in London.
It is actually interesting. Someone has come up with a way of investing in what they call cloud futures, where they take empty apartment blocks in London that no one can afford to live in, and say that they are using them to host virtual cloud infrastructure, and through some complicated securities restructuring thing, they've managed to do very well out of the whole deal by selling the same piece of empty property twice to the same people. It's absolutely brilliant. Post-truth accountancy. It's wonderful. Everyone should embrace it. How about that post-truth engineering? Have you seen this?
Post-truth? No, I have not seen post-truth engineering. You
so they
weren't going to say things I didn't know about.
These new languages where you can have false true or you can have fake news. So you can define an operator, but the entire program, the runtime environment, is sensitive to the political climate in which it is being executed. So you can have, 2 plus 2 equals, and then someone, if you want it to be 5, what you do is you say 2 plus 2 equals 5, right-click share on social media, and if it gets enough upvotes, it will redefine the integral constants of your language to make that the truth.
You can, it's actually fairly easy to make 2 plus 2 equal 5.
It is in
mathematical terms. You just pass a law in the United States Senate.
Yes.
Or in one of the state senates.
There was once a pope who declared pi to be 4. and then got very upset with clockmakers who said, we can't do that, Your Holiness. We've tried really hard to make a clock using pi = 4, and it doesn't work.
See, the thing is, we can laugh at that because that was back in the Dark Ages, but in the 1970s, the state legislature of Arkansas did exactly the same thing, except they said it was 3.
Did you know that...
Do you know how they knew it was 3? Because it said it was 3 in the Bible.
You can't argue with that. Did you know that in November 2016, Poland elected Jesus Christ as king?
Really?
Yes. Did you know this? Have you seen this? They put some motion through Parliament in Poland, and they elected Jesus Christ as king of Poland because of some obscure prophecy that said something about the Poland will fall if Christ is not king. And someone went, we should probably hedge our bets on this one, lads. And so they did it. And oh yeah, Jesus is king of Poland. Anyway, so that's a little bit of ancient news from 2016, the year that just kept on giving.
Yes, 11 years ago.
And giving and giving. Let's skip forward to NDC City 17.
2037.
In partnership with NCD Mini Cydonia, the first truly interplanetary development conference.
Thank you, Elon.
Now, the fallacies of distributed computing, I'm sure you can all tell me exactly what they are. One of them is that the network is instantaneous, and people sort of fudge that for a long time, because on Earth, there's really only so far you can be from anywhere. And then when we first started implementing systems for doing interplanetary communication, someone realized that when you have a ping latency of 22 minutes, or 16 minutes on a good day, because, you know, there's a lot of variance in these kinds of things.
200 million miles.
Lots of the algorithms we had didn't really work, and they had massive problems trying to relay information and content and algorithms backwards and forwards between Cydonia base and Earth, until someone had the bright idea of installing AdBlock on all of the relay satellites, which cut out 95% of the extraneous communication overhead, and suddenly everything was lovely again.
But at NDC City 17 2037, by the way, that's a Half-Life 2 reference if you didn't get it, so yeah. We do have some great talks lined up this year on all sorts of subjects. We've got talks on the Internet of Brains. We've got talks on working effectively with multidimensional temporal feedback processors. Someone's doing a talk on do-it-yourself corneal implant upgrades. And we've got a couple of talks on why functional programming is good. Personally, I'm looking forward to seeing John Skeet's talk about how Google are using high-resolution sonar drone submarines to map Florida. Oh, the Unix epoch runs out again, doesn't it?
It does, yes, because
It's, yes.
So you know we were going to invent a time machine so we could go back to 1997 and hurt people who put blink inside marquee. We've worked out all we need to do is to get our phones to define when we are on our calendars based on a 32-bit integer count since the epoch. And on that date, it will overflow, and we'll all go skipping backwards to NDC London, 1877.
And of course, the other big news from 2037 is the merger of Siri, Kinect, Yandex, Netscape, eBay, and Twitter.
What are we going to call it? I think we could come up with a punchy acronym for that.
S-K-Y-N-E-T.
Skin E.T.
Skinty?
Skin?
Sky.
We're coming to you from NDC 2047. We're in Bunker D at an undisclosed location.
We've learned that Alexa plans to deploy the new D1000 Deliverators at Justin Bieber's inauguration in Bunker A. These new drones are way more powerful than the D800S. They can deliver their payload within 3 minutes, or next minute if you have the prime implants. So we have to strike now.
The only approved language that we're using to interface with our own computer systems now is Esperanto, because it's the only human language that the computers have not learned to understand and use against us, because nobody ever spoke it. Do you speak Esperanto, Mark?
Kiom di Esperantisto jes necesitas por sanguiam polo?
I don't know.
Duo. Uno por sanguiam polo, and one to translate it into English.
Which means...
How many Esperantinos, which is people who speak Esperanto, does it take to change a light bulb? 2. One to change a light bulb, and one to translate it into English.
Applause for that.
And for any
Esperanto is actually a delightful language for pluralizing your verbs. If you're one of the problems we have in English, if you've ever written a program where you have to track sheep, the plural of sheep is sheep, so you don't know what to call the database table. Is it sheep or sheeps?
Sheeps.
Or sheeps, yeah, sheeps. Yeah. And then the plural of sheeps is sheepses.
Sheep_list.
But Esperanto... The plural of sheep is obviously flock.
Yes.
But then you start getting into all sorts of problem with localization. But Esperanto has a completely syntactically consistent pluralization. All nouns end in O, and the plural is always odge.
Yes.
Is this
yes,
right?
odge.
So there you go. Some
Dodge.
best practice from NDC Bunker D 2047. Use Esperanto to name your variables so you can pluralize them consistently. If they'd used Esperanto for Ruby on Rails, they'd have cut something like 8 megs of weird cases and look at... You know, Ruby on Rails will pluralize octopus for you, automatically.
Octopodes?
Octopodes, yes, it's in there. It's, if you're defining your controllers and everything and you have an octopus entity, it will automatically pluralize and understand octopodes for you.
Takes 8 cores and
Anyway,
3 minutes
we're
to
getting
do
a bit
it, but
chipper
yes.
and upbeat here, considering
yes.
we're in a nuclear bunker waiting for Bieber to be inaugurated God
you've
president.
got a laugh, haven't you? So please do remember to test your EMP grenades before deploying them into the production servers.
Now, one of the interesting things that we've discovered when we were digging Bunker D here is we found some Nokia 3210 phones that not only still worked, but they still had battery. We're working on a primitive mesh networking system based on using Snake to send text messages from one handset to the next. So it's kind of like Navajo Code Talkers, only for millennials. It's brilliant.
The new definition of done is a smoking hole in the ground full of liquid metal. And we have just a wormhole opened up from the future and a single message. They managed to get a single message through from the year 2147, which apparently is going to be the year of Linux on the desktop.
And on that note, we are
10 minutes into Donald Trump's presidency and we haven't died yet. I'm going to call that a win.
Call that a win. We'll take some questions, but only if they're funny.
It's not so much a question, but like pointing something out. Actually, no one wrote any code after 2007. Well, not many people anyway.
Why?
Because in 2008 they released Stack Overflow, and so everyone
That's
started
true.
copying and pasting. So the whole rest of that talk is kind of
Yes, Stack Overflow, the last
programming language you'll ever need.
the last source code repository you're ever going to need.
Have you seen, somebody has actually implemented this. They have a thing where you write a unit test with a comment. And what it does is it punches the comment into Google, traverses all of the search results that come back, finds anything inside a code block in the HTML, downloads it, compiles it, and runs it to see if it makes your test pass. And if it doesn't, it just goes back and it finds the next result, and the next result, and the next result. So basically, if you can define what your code actually needs to do in terms of describing it in the comments and writing the unit tests for it, you can go to the pub. And when you come back, your machine will be owned by Russian hackers.
Yes.
But hey, it makes for a good story, right?
Yes. I once, my first personal computer was, as I said, x81, and I got it for my 8th birthday, and then I didn't get a 16K RAM pack until the following Christmas.
How many pounds did that cost?
How many what?
How many pounds? $1 per bit. How much was your 16K
The 16K,
RAM pack?
actually, I inherited it from my cousin who had just been bought a Spectrum or something, but I think they were about 100 quid when they first appeared, and then they...
69.99 went down to 40.
But that was a lot of money in those days.
And you spent £2 on sellotape to get it to stay in the right place so it didn't wobble.
Epoxy resin. But no, so I had 1K of working memory to put my programs into. And it occurred to me that that is 1,024 bytes, 1,024 numbers between 0 and 255. And these days, you can probably emulate a ZX81 on a single CUDA core. So I'm pretty sure that you could spin up some compute clouding like Google or Azure or something like that, and just try every possible combination of bytes that could have been a ZX81 program, and you would be able to generate all the ones that could ever possibly have existed, and see if any of them were
on the
Quake.
Atari 2600.
It would do, yes.
Yeah. You see the documentary about the guys who, there's been this legend for ages that the thing that basically killed Atari in the 80s was they made an E.T. game at movie time that was so bad, they ended up having to bury thousands of cartridges in landfill. And this was this urban myth, and Atari were like, oh, we never did that. And then one day, someone who's, was investigating this got a call from the people in like San Diego Municipal Waste Department going, we're bulldozing this landfill, and we found a load of ET cartridges, and we thought you might want to come out and have a look. And they made it's on Netflix, this whole thing. This sort of guy with this really weird obsession. It turns out after all these years, he's absolutely right. Unplayably bad game, thousands of cartridges dumped in landfill, and they start building it, and he digs one up.
It is really awful, though.
Yeah.
It is a terrible, terrible game. You're just looking at it and going, which one of those things is supposed to be E.T.?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that was fun. The games back in the day when you'd spend a good 10, 15 minutes going, okay, that's moving, that's moving, that's moving. If I move my Atari Speed King joystick, am I controlling anything on the screen? And then after 2 minutes you go, I'm going to plug it in and see if that makes any difference.
Okay.
A question.
Yes, question.
Thomas, yes.
Did the message from 2147 talk about functional programming?
No, it died. It's actually in 2048, people just went, hey, it's a binary year. Let's celebrate by killing off functional programming forever.
I realised category theory actually was fundamentally flawed, and so all of the matter and functional programming fell apart. Sorry.
Yeah. It was because we used the new social theory of maths to prove that 2 + 2 = 5. And
Post-math. The new math.
Monads.
Any other questions?
Is COBOL still alive?
Always. COBOL is always alive.
What do you think
COBOL
Skynet is
lives on
running
in
on?
our hearts. Or that
In our
may just
hearts
be-
and in our banks.
Yes.
Yes. Anyone else? Yes.
How much black box testing does an airplane's black box need?
So the thing about an airplane's black box is that it's orange. And there's not one of them, there's 16. So there's actually 16 orange boxes on an airplane that has a black box flight recorder. How much testing do they need? I don't know, it's kind of hard to test them, because really to test them what you need to do is kill a whole bunch of people and then see if the black box will tell you what killed them. So it's one of those things where you really want some kind of a mocking framework. And not a kind of, ha-ha, you're all going to die mocking. I'm talking like, the technical definition of mocking here.
I outsourced my black box testing to Malaysia.
So the easiest way to test a black box is to paint it white. What?
It's not too soon. That was like weeks ago, wasn't it?
I'm allowed to make that joke because I've flown Malaysia since they lost 2 aircraft, and it was fine.
Oh, now someone leaves. Look, there.
Yeah.
I finally upset someone.
Right, let's wrap it up. Thank you very much for coming. I hope you've all enjoyed the conference. Those of you who are coming to PubConf tonight, I hope you enjoy PubConf. We will see you all at the next NDC. Have a great weekend. Safe trip home. See you all soon.
Cheers.
Good night.